Dr. Elst, Hindus and Hindu nationalism are often accused of being right-wing. Yeah, Hindutva is meant to be fascism and, extremism. Hindus get classed as Nazis. What's the truth behind all these labels?
Well, historically, of course, they came too early on the scene to be Nazis or fascists. You see, it has fairly deep roots. The immediate occasion for founding provincial Hindu Sabhas was as a reaction against the foundation of the Muslim League, patronized by the British in 1906, which itself was a reaction against the mainly Hindu struggle against the partition of the province of Bengal. So you see, at that point, the British for the first time got a taste of the Hindu mobilizing power. So they mobilized all anti-Hindu forces, among others the Muslims, through the Muslim League, also the anti-Brahmin movement in the south and so on. You see, so anything that could be used against the Hindus was then given some political power. Now, the Hindu Sabhas had a very checkered life in the beginning. In 1915 there was an attempt to unite them as the Hindu Mahasabha. And then in 1922 finally you had the real start of the Hindu Mahasabha. This was in reaction mainly against the so-called Mopla rebellion, which was a Muslim pogrom of the Hindus in Kerala. So at that point, the March on Rome of Mussolini had hardly taken place. The Nazis in Germany were still completely out of power, were not known in India at all. So this really had a proper Indian dynamic. Also a lot of details, like for example the uniform that the RSS wears. See, it has nothing to do with European examples. First of all, the uniform doesn't look like any specific uniform used by European fascists or any other movement.
Isn't it a Boy Scout uniform?
But of course it resembles a Boy Scout uniform.
So they're more probably inspired by
yes,
the
exactly.
Scouts.
And you see till today, in fact, they have that mentality. But it has specifically to do with the job of providing security to the annual Congress meeting, especially in 1925. And so this regime of providing security, military style, that has remained in the RSS. See, that has started forming the discipline, the typical language of forms used by the RSS. Again, you see that has nothing to do with Nazism or fascism.
Yeah, but wasn't there's a quote where Goldwalker says I forgot what you remember it.
Yes, of course. You see, Gowalkar said that
because they always use that quote to show, look, the
yeah, of course. So Gowalkar said that Germany at this point is in the eye of the world. Race spirit at its highest has been manifested there. Now, first of all, he doesn't use the word Nazi, he doesn't use the word Hitler. And elsewhere in the same book in which he says these things, namely We Are Nationhood Defined, which was completed just days before the Kristallnacht in Germany, the night of broken glass, which was an anti-Jewish pogrom. So he didn't even know about that yet. You see, elsewhere in that book, he clearly repudiates Nazism in so many words. He also repudiates the very distinctive point of the Nazi movement, which was anti-Semitism. On the contrary, you see, he takes the Jews as an example. You see how after 2000 years of being lost, they had this national movement, the Zionist movement. They recreated their own language and started using it as a first language, which was very much an object of admiration for the Hindus, who don't even manage to propagate Sanskrit as a second language. So the Jews were switching over to Hebrew as a first language. So Gowalkar takes this as an example. So, it has nothing to do with Nazism. Also, another main point of the Nazi movement and of the Italian fascist movement was the repudiation of democracy. Now, he constantly takes democratic politics as the norm. You see, the British, for all their faults, essentially pioneered the British model, the Westminster democracy. So that's all he knew, and he didn't think that this was the problem, that this had to be changed, that this had to be replaced with an authoritarian system. So you see, the two main points of the Nazi movement, anti-Semitism and anti-democracy, were not in evidence in the Hindu movement.
So about Veer Savarkar, he gets usually accused of being, pro-Nazi, and that was the truth behind that.
Well, in 1939, when England declared war on Germany, immediately he offered his services to the British war effort. So that already, in the actions that he took, he immediately refutes that allegation. Now, I can understand where this comes from. You see, he wrote his seminal book Hindutva at roughly the same time when Hitler wrote his Mein Kampf, and also in the same circumstances, namely while being imprisoned. But you see, precisely because of that simultaneousness, there can have been no influence. In fact, at that point, very few people in India even knew what was happening in Germany. Very few people in England even knew, because in Germany still it was a fairly marginal phenomenon. So, you see, he had his own Indian circumstances that made him formulate his philosophy. It is true that there was a European influence, but not the interbellum authoritarian movements, but the 19th century nationalist movement, particularly of Italian reunification. So that's why he translated the work of Giuseppe Mazzini, which was a formulation of Italian nationalism, and it is that nationalism that also influenced him and that he tried to fit into Indian circumstances.
So what about then the label of right-wing? Is the BJP right-wing?
I wouldn't say that of the BJP. There are a few people associated with the BJP who have taken a strong pro-free market stance. So they have repudiated the socialism that has characterized India since the Nehruvian government. And you have people like Arun Shauri or Swapan Das Gupta, who strongly represent what would in England be the Conservative Party, the Thatcherite economics. Neither of them is a Hindu fundamentalist or anything like that. So in that sense, if that is right-wing, then they are not right-wing. But in some respects you could see why the left would dub them right-wing. In other senses, I don't think it applies. The BJP has long been socialist. You see, now they are going with the flow, now that socialism has demonstrated that it doesn't work, or at least it has grave problems. They have grown away from socialism and embrace more fully the free market alternative. So in that sense you could say they are maybe not right-wing, but at least not left-wing. Though of course this is a difference with the old-time Jan Sangh, the earlier incarnation of the BJP, which was pretty much a socialist party at the time when socialism was going strong, when the Soviet Union was reputedly doing fine. So the BJP, in that sense, you see, it's not their main issue, so they follow suit. At the time when socialism was strong, they were rather socialist. Now they are rather pro-free market.
So why do the Hindus or the Hindu cause, any paper you pick up, especially in Western papers, they will always come out with right-wing groups, right-wing Hindus, right-wing, and you think to yourself, what right-wing? Why do they keep on getting accused of all these other labels?
Well, first of all, it's not...
And why hasn't been a Hindu side disputing all these labels as well?
Yeah, that's an important second question. Why are Hindus not putting up a fight?
Anyone swears
Yeah.
at them and they think, okay, that's what I am, basically. They
Mhm.
find themselves in the eyes of what the enemy wants to define them.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Now, it's important, first of all, to realize that it is not the Western media who are creating this image. You
Mm.
see, mostly, correspondents for Western papers or TV stations don't understand the matter at all.
Yeah, true.
And you see, in Delhi, they hang out in a cocktail circuit
Yeah,
with their secularist friends. You see, it's mutually beneficial. And so, you see, they just pick up the notions that are current among the secularists in India.
Mm.
And so they imitate that position. Essentially, you have to look at the Indian secularist stand. Why do they call the Hindus right?
So why do they call it? I mean, to me, I wouldn't even call them liberal or secular anyway. To directly, I call them Hindu-phobic, Hindu-phobes, Gangadins. Basically that's where they really fall into that category. But all right, for argument's sake, if we say they're secularists, why do they give all this type of?
Yeah, well, they have hoodwinked the West into believing that they are secularists, which of course they are not.
Is to keep the image of the savage alive, basically.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, the Hindus, why do they accept these type of labels? Why haven't they done anything in response? I mean, why isn't there anything there that this is who we are? You see it. I mean, I hear it from Hindus myself. Oh yeah, we're right wing. And when you ask them, then what is right wing? They just don't know. They're clueless, basically.
Exactly. They very much follow the discourse imposed by their enemies. Now, for a long time, the enemies were really in power.
Yeah.
When you put on a TV, all you had was state television, which was controlled by the enemy. But now you see the opportunities have changed quite a bit. And you see there is the possibility of creating alternative media. Not yet the dominant media, but at least it's there. And you do effectively find a number of online papers, online media that start putting through a different voice. But at the moment you see the enemy is still in the ascendant. But you see some Hindus, still a small minority, are trying to create an alternative. But you see the older generations for too long have labored under this assumption that the enemy naturally is in power and we have to do his bidding.
And they've created this illusion of making the enemy even more powerful than they are. So they
Exactly.
react in that kind of way.
And in the BJP, in the ruling party, this mentality is still there. You see, you have some alternative new media like India Facts, like Swaraj, like Hindu Human Rights, that create an alternative voice, but to people who are not very active on the intellectual front, the old mentality still persists. And so the present government is still very much marked by that old mentality.